Hello, and welcome back to the watching brief, or I suppose the regular watching brief, as opposed to a special covering a demonstration at Sheffield, for the week of the 21st of June 2021. I am joined by an edamamied up Andy. Hello, Andy.
Do I have to explain that now?
You can, or you can leave it as a mystery. Either way.
Put it this way, dear viewer. It involves the family House Brockman visiting our local Sainsbury's and its sushi counter, and a nice Japanese healthy snack
Brilliant.
that is now stuck between my teeth.
Well,
Anyway, too much information.
yeah, London problems to one side. I suppose. Well, actually, no, that's not fair. That's not fair. Supermarket problems to one side. We have sushi up here as well. Our watching brief continues, does it not? To examine the archaeological news of the day and present it here for you guys to examine, digest, and comment on below. And this week is, as you were saying just before we started recording, a little bit of a placeholder week. There's lots of things that are happening, lots of pots on the boil. And I suppose we should start by just examining what actually happened in Sheffield on Wednesday. In so much as I was on standby for much of the day to record, and then on Thursday afternoon we were going to record, and that didn't happen because of the internet. And then here we are today recording something that isn't exclusively about Sheffield University Senate. So what happened? And in the context of all the other things that we're going to keep an eye on, what are we going to be keeping an eye on at Sheffield?
Right. So essentially, Sheffield University Senate, which is an advisory body consisting of members of staff and students' union, and so on, met on Wednesday afternoon to discuss the recommendation of the Archaeology Review Group, which, if people remember, was to close the archaeology department and end most archaeology teaching, only retaining certain what the university describes as areas of excellence within other departments. Mm-hmm. That was the proposal that was on the table. It transpired that, first of all, that Senate wasn't going to take a vote on it. I've got a question in with the university comms team at the moment saying basically, were they afraid that if they took a vote on the floor of Senate that the senior management might lose, which would have been rather embarrassing if that had happened, given that the chair of Senate is the Vice Chancellor, Professor Cohn-Lamberts. As it stands, somebody who was in the meeting said that it went on longer than expected. The other business was cancelled. Meeting lasted about 3 hours. It was a detailed discussion. There were some critical questions of the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Jill Valentine, who actually led the process and has been heavily criticised particularly by students. For the way that she conducted the review, but that she seems to have got through that particular ordeal. There were comments about the figures. There were comments about but also about the viability of the department, which is the university's angle. That the department, as it currently stands, it's too small. It's not economically viable. The upshot of this is that, instead of taking a vote, members of Senate have been asked to answer a questionnaire. And sources have provided the wording of the questionnaire, which is advice on the future academic direction of archaeology. It is proposed to retain key areas of strength in archaeological research and teaching, including cultural heritage and osteoarchaeology, by aligning them with other parts of the university, with a strong commitment to identifying other areas of strength where there may be scope for innovative collaborations to support the transition, and to target investment in further development of these areas of excellence. Lots of use of the word of excellence, including
strong Britain, strong. Sorry. Something else. That's one Britain, one nation.
Sorry, I'll break off. Just look for the day-to-day video about Britain. It's all going to be all right.
Okay.
I tweeted it out this morning. That's, and I'm just go with the Swedish Glad Midsummer.
Yeah.
I think that's a much nicer.
Much better.
Absolutely. Yeah. Glad Midsummer. So basically the question, it says that, and it finishes, in response to this proposal, please comment with your advice on the following. please comment on the academic elements of the proposal.
Mm.
In other words, Senate are only allowed to comment on the proposal itself. They're not allowed to question the process. They're not allowed to question the figures. They're not allowed to question the advisability of Professor Valentine likening students to dividing students between ones who shop at Aldi and the higher quality ones who shop at Marks and Spencer, who the university would prefer to have as part of its brand, allegedly. So critics of the process, it looks like another stitch up. It looks like that the Senate was prevented from expressing a joint joint version, a joint opinion of the process, and certain things have been ruled out. Again, the story's got somewhere to run, and the next part of the next official action is a meeting of the University Council, and the University Council is the body that will take a vote, and it's a binding vote on the future of archaeology at Sheffield, yes or no.
Do you know when that is?
12th of July, I think. So, but around about 2 weeks' time.
Okay.
Just over 2 weeks' time.
Well, I guess we'll keep an eye out for that. I'm in the context of other things that we need to talk about in today's watching brief. I'll just briefly say I am weary. I am extremely wary of people in various high-powered positions in public life being able to snap rules, not just bend them, actually snap them, and then form and get to dictate the way in which their conduct is examined. It is a very ugly tendency in. I mean, you've termed it, strong management or whatever it's called, macho management in the past. This idea of never apologise, never explain.
Yeah, never apologise, never explain.
It's wearisome. It's really quite sad. And obviously, we'll keep on supporting and reporting on the Sheffield campaign from the Archaeology department. But if the university doesn't do something or say something, or at least comment on, for goodness sake, the conduct of admin, for example, we know they apparently destroyed documents contrary to
yes. That's been admitted.
Yeah, contrary to policy. Then what's the point of having policy? What's the point of having Senate and Council and all this nonsense? If basically one person can, one or two or three people can do this sort of thing and not be held to account. And obviously,
well,
I'm being a little bit, as I say, I'm wary, a little bit cynical there, but it'll be disappointing if nothing else is said on this.
Well, I think there will be other things said. The process isn't complete yet. It could still be examined by something like a judicial review, but that can't happen until after the official vote has been taken and the university has a policy. That can then be questioned. But already over 100 students have submitted a letter of complaint to the University Ethics Committee about the way that the review was conducted, or at least the way their part in the review was conducted. We've talked about that before, and I've written it up in the pipeline if people want to look up the article. So other things are happening. People are trying to bring transparency and accountability to the process, but yes, as in so many areas at the moment, it's an uphill struggle.
Uphill struggle is the word. Moving on then to other uphill struggles, we have the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, who's definitely on my Christmas card list, talking to the Higher Education Policy Institute with a series of comments summarised, for example, in a Twitter thread that I have up here in front of me from Will Hazel of the I newspaper. Also, you chose another thread as well, which we'll include in links below, where Gavin
happens to be good, dear viewer. It happens to be the one that I did yesterday when he did the speech. But
there we go. Okay, which Gavin appears to blow hot and cold, talk truth and lies, possibly, and
you might say that. You might say that. I couldn't possibly comment.
So a couple of
As a,
couple of highlights here include Gavin Williamson saying that UK universities are the most vital jewel in our education crown. Isn't that lovely? And he goes on to say that unis, however, have not been delivering enough of the kind of opportunities we need for the society that we want. The purpose of education is to give people the skills to lead a fulfilling working life. Keep your head down, get to work, produce for this economy, produce for your society. That's not the purpose of higher education, as far as I'm concerned. He actually compares higher education to what's called FE, or further education, elsewhere in the thread, where he says that higher education institutions need to be following further education's lead in providing more opportunities for things like apprenticeships and practical, so-called practical work opportunities and this kind of thing. And I don't disagree with that at all. But to begin by saying most vital jewel in our education crown, while also overseeing various attacks on notions of freedom of speech and the value of, for example, performing arts and archaeology and other bits and bobs. I suppose you could say he's doubling down on what the government's priorities are. But it seems to me that that statement, that the purpose of higher education being primarily to provide a fulfilling working life, is it's undermining the notion that higher education is a jewel. It's much more of a cog, I would suppose, in a machine. What do you make of this? Because as the listener can probably tell, my I'm going from the Sheffield management now to Gavin Williamson, and I'm not happier. Go ahead.
Look, I read the whole speech as delivered and tweeted out some excerpts yesterday, and again, I do urge people to read this stuff, because although it's not the most scintillating piece of prose you'll ever read, it's important, because this is a senior member of the government stating the government's position effectively. And you're right about the analogies or the suggestions he makes about the role of further and higher education. There's actually another quote in the speech which I think goes even further than that. He says they,
I was leaving
meaning
that
the
one to you.
universities. All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
You're welcome.
You know which direction my antennae twitch. No, he said they, meaning the universities, must support and drive regional growth and productivity, particularly where it is weak. And to do this, they'll need to change, and will not be slow to step in if those changes are not happening. Now, effectively, that means universities need to respond to their local economy, and he's implying that the government will step in to direct possibly courses and content if they don't.
Oh, and by the sounds of it, quotas. You don't need this many of that type of graduate in this area.
Absolutely.
Now, the thing is, though, that seems to imply that universities exclusively cater to people from the area in which they're teaching. What about the drive to recruit international students, which I'm pretty sure he's previously said is one of the great things about UK universities? What about the fact that people can, as it stands at least, go to university outside the country where they're from? For example, I went to Durham University. I'm from North Wales. Yes. It's just more of the same myopic, moronic, circular thinking from this chap. And again, I know I'm using emotive language again, but we're about to move on to something else where the nicety of acting unlawfully is about to be deployed, and yet again we see leadership seemingly getting away with whatever it is they particularly want to get away with. They can sort of decide, as I say, the way in which people are allowed to criticise them. I mean, what's the significance of this speech from Williamson? Is it just another marker on the road that we're on? Do you think?
I think it is. It's a waypoint. I mean, he emphasises again and we've just talked about it in terms of Sheffield with its Aldi level students, not wanting to have the Aldi level students, wanting the Marks and Spencer's brand students. Williamson talks about that. He talks about entry requirements and implies that it will be compulsory to have particular grades in English and maths to be able to embark on a degree. Now, that immediately rules out certain people, possibly certain societal groups who are disadvantaged or don't achieve at GCSE and A level,
or who are very capable but won't, but because of their current circumstances, won't actually see those fruits come to bear until later on in life, or with other contexts.
That's exactly right. Now, to be fair to Williamson, he does talk about being more flexible and improving access to lifelong learning. And I mean, I'm certainly fully in favour of that, because it's something I took advantage of, and I was one of the last cohort to be able to do that before the Labour government, in fact, began to cut back and make it more difficult to access and more expensive.
Yeah, what is the point I'm inclined to ask of lifelong learning, when education is primarily in order to provide a fulfilling working life? Does he actually mean lifelong training? Is that what he's getting at? See what I mean? It's couched in the niceties of educational language, but it's not actually consistent. And I find myself thinking this man doesn't understand, or certainly doesn't respect the people that he's talking to.
Okay, look, whichever civil servant drafted it for Williamson, or he may have written it himself, but whichever civil servant checked it, they are aware of the criticisms. There's a line in it where he says, we're not attacking the arts, although it doesn't provide any evidence to back that up. And subsequent events, and particularly Andrew Lloyd Webber's interview on LBC this morning, and I urge people to look it up as well if they haven't heard it already, that might give the lie to that.
Yes.
Yeah. And he also talks about underachieving courses in computing and things like that. So he's aware of the criticisms that the government's faced in putting forward these policies, but essentially what it boils down to is making it more difficult to access higher education. There's an emphasis on standards, not outcomes. Certainly one of the arguments at Sheffield is that many people flourished at university who might not have flourished in education previously. They just need to get there. And so that's problematic. And then there are the two other main problems, I think, with it that people will see who are critical of the government will be that it implies particularly government intervention in areas where maybe government is better to apply a light touch, like academia, like academic freedom, like what courses are taught and how they're taught,
and where they're taught.
And the way they're taught. And the just the general functional, mechanistic, transactional view of education that appears to be being presented. Get a degree and you'll get a good paying job. Okay, that there is an expectation of that, but there's also an expectation, people going into our game, you get a degree and you don't expect a well-paying job, but you do it because you love it, you care about it, and you think it's important.
But also
same with the performing arts.
But also at the same time, I remember when I was in A level, right? Tony Blair was in government. We were being told, if you don't go to university, you're going to grow up and you're going to have 3 legs and there'll be a pineapple growing out of your head. And if you're lucky, maybe you might smell of onions for the rest of your life if you don't go to university. So basically, it was go to university or your life is going to be completely terrible. I remember at that point going, well, what about all the jobs? How is the jobs market actually going to reconfigure itself to actually understand the value of all of these people with BAs, for example, or MAs or PhDs or postdocs, this kind of thing? And quite simply, it didn't. That did not happen. And so now we have a government that is post-Labour, certainly, a government which is benefiting.
I would argue that Labour's post-Labour, but there we are. That's another story.
That is benefiting from a generalised public exposure to higher education, whereby parents can say, "Oh, my child went to uni and all they did was get drunk all the time. Don't really see the value of that." So a sort of a cynical undermining of academic growth, authority, and the benefits actually of going to university. So they're benefiting from that. So that means that they can take a swipe at whoever they want to take a swipe at the moment. But they're also as well still trying to peddle this notion that education is a jewel in the crown, and that education is important, and that education will lead to a well-paid job. Well, I've heard this before, and the thing is, I feel this cynical, and I've been to university, and I would, if I could afford to in the future, send any potential kid I might have to university as well, if I can. But where's the proof in the pudding that any of this stuff will work, as opposed to it just being yet another ideological tinkering with the university education system? And as it stands, I see no evidence that it's anything other than ideology. And it's an ideology that's very particularly driven against, for example, art, cultural expression, cultural exploration, and an awareness of our shared history in this nation. We do have other things to talk about, but is there anything you'd like to say finally on this?
I just think that yeah, we are even before COVID, the world was in a state of flux. In 10 years' time, the idea of a personal vehicle that you sits outside your house and you fill with petrol and drive around may be a thing of the past. Um, COVID has emptied the high streets. Retail jobs are now in decline.
Mm-hmm.
There are many, many debates to be had. We're starting to see again debates about universal basic income. Furlough has prompted that debate, and whether it's actually viable. Whether there's enough money in the system that can support people who might not have a 9 to 5 working life anymore, or it might be very variable. And universities and educational opportunities of all kinds will be there to actually help enrich those people's lives.
No,
and therefore,
no,
by enriching those lives, by enriching society.
No, they're there to provide a fulfilling working life. They're not there to enrich people's lives, apparently. No.
Well, exactly.
No.
That's the point. That's the discussion that has to be had, and I think it will be had. That there'll be a pushback against this.
I'm not sure it is being had. He was telling people. And this is reflected in what we've talked about in previous watching briefs about priorities for funding. It's reflected in conversations that surround things like the National Trust, though largely those things have been conflated. They've been manufactured, in order to take advantage of that base who were cynical and mistrusting of higher education and so-called snobby elite type people. Incidentally, very working class in my background, so don't come at me with that, people, in comments. But it's one of those things where they've got to get their heads straight, and maybe the problem here is actually that Gavin Williamson is not the person to do this. He doesn't strike me as particularly clever. He doesn't strike me as particularly focused, and he doesn't strike me as someone who actually has a passion for the genuine improvement of this nation's future via education. This is. Well, as you were saying, this is a mechanism with which to satisfy the projected needs of the labour market. It's yeah. But anyway, we need to move on. We need to move on. We need to move on in this watching brief. We will return to this, but this is something else to keep an eye on, folks, this week. As of all,
very much so.
These are the pots on the stove. Our next pot on the stove, and maybe that's the thumbnail. I'll just do a series of pots with things coming out of them. The next one is actually
boiling over with this horrible congealing mess on the top of the cooker.
Yeah. Did I mention that I'm due for a holiday?
The world is due for a holiday.
Yeah. The next pot is at Stonehenge, where Grant Shapps, Transport Secretary, has been described as having, quote, acted unlawfully in his failure to properly consider damage to ancient sites and artefacts in giving the Stonehenge Road Tunnel a go-ahead. This is according to the High Court. What does this mean, Andy? So, in so much as there was this is the beginning of a process, isn't it? So there was
It
a
is.
judicial review that's begun,
Yeah.
and the outcome will. What will happen at the outcome of this process? So this is a headline coming out of this initial review, isn't it? But what will happen at the end? Go ahead.
Right, and I think I'm going to queue up the rest of the discussion because by sheer coincidence, there's nothing planned about this. Get it? See what I did there?
Mm-hmm.
The UNESCO, which is the body that oversees grants World Heritage status and oversees World Heritage status, published or at least received an opinion this week that Liverpool World Heritage Site should lose its World Heritage status because of intrusive developments on the Liverpool waterfront. That there was immediate pushback on that from people in Liverpool, politicians and architects, and saying that UNESCO is taking an overly purist view of the World Heritage Site, and that although there had been development, it had been necessary development to make the city viable, to make the waterfront viable.
Yeah, this is the Liverpool Waters project, a large scale.
The New Everton Stadium, and so on.
And just briefly, in this instance, the idea is that it will significantly alter the skyline and the environment of what are historic docklands. So there's the Albert Dock and others.
That's right. And to give you an idea of how sensitive these things are, astonishingly, Robert Jenrick actually knocked back a development proposal for the Albert Embankment in London, opposite the Houses of Parliament, or close to the Houses of Parliament, this week, on the grounds that the towers that were going to be included in the development impinged on the protected views of the Westminster Parliament and Westminster Abbey World Heritage Site. So, the government can act on these things and can take World Heritage status seriously. The issue at stake at Stonehenge is that the A303 upgrade is the short tunnel option, which means that the exit to the tunnel and a dual carriageway crosses the World Heritage Site, the Stonehenge and Avebury World Heritage Site, where it wasn't there before. Now, the reason it's being judicially reviewed, which is a legal process, and it's the last legal process really that's in the way of the campaigners, or in the hands of the campaigners before the project goes ahead. Grant Shapps is alleged to have unlawfully overridden the opinions of the examining body, which the examining authority, which was a 5-person panel of expert planning inspectors. It's these aren't lay people; these are really hard-nosed, very bright people who are thoroughly immersed
in people who have enriched their lives by going to a university, perhaps.
Probably, but these are people who deal with planning every day of the week. They know the law backwards. They know the intention of the law backwards, and they came down on the side that the A303 upgrade, as currently designed, should not go ahead, and they made that recommendation to the minister. The minister overrode that, and that's what's being reviewed now. It's the subject of a 3-day hearing. The Safe Stonehenge World Heritage Site group, which is bringing the case, which it's crowdfunded, says that there are a number of grounds that they attack Shapps on. For example, that harm to heritage assets within the site should have been assessed individually rather than looking at the historic environment in totality. It says that Historic England's advice wasn't strong enough for the Secretary of State to override the planning inspectors.
In this instance, was English Heritage's advice to say that there was no problem?
That they, effectively, they've effectively greenlit the current project. And English Heritage, which owns Stonehenge, have actually welcomed it. Okay. But there's a lot of heritage sector politics going on there, as well as.
They're just a national body charged with protecting the integrity of the historic environment in this country, whose purse strings happen to be held by the government. There's no conflict of interest there.
No, but also, they also say Shapps left out mandatory considerations from his decision, including breaching local planning policies, and that the finding of heritage or harm undermines the business case for the proposal because there's a less damaging alternative available, which is the long tunnel, which will cost a few £billion extra.
Mm-hmm.
Look, in the end, this isn't about the merits of the project. It's purely about the legality of Grant Shapps' decision. And one
So
way
what's
or
the difference
another,
between acting unlawfully and breaking the law? I'm wondering, because we've had a few ministers lately who have acted unlawfully in this country, and no one's gone away in handcuffs.
the current edition of Private Eye has a list of them, and it's much longer than you expect, and it includes names you might not even recognise.
Mm-hmm.
But look, acting unlawfully, it's the it means yes, you've acted unlawfully, but it means you've not acted criminally. It's something that you haven't interpreted the law properly in your decision making, and therefore you're told to go back and think again. Is effectively what's under discussion here.
Okay.
Now, it's again, these are very complicated areas. These are legal areas where you get into trouble very quickly if you accuse people of criminality when you haven't got the proof, and I'm certainly not going to start doing that.
I'm just wondering what the difference is between the two. It sounds to me like I've heard it described by a lawyer on Twitter, an actual lawyer, as being a legal nicety. Basically, it gives people the
Yes,
opportunity to make these sorts of mistakes in public office and not be arrested.
precisely. That's a very, as you'd expect from a member of the legal profession, that's an extremely good definition. Yeah, otherwise most of the cabinet, said large part of the current cabinet would be banged up by now, according to the list in Private Eye.
Well, maybe you should be doing things like deciding on whether or not you build a road next to Stonehenge based on something other than your own personal opinion. But anyway.
Now then, so...
Sorry. In terms of opinion, the opinion that matters now is the opinion of the judge in the case, and they're likely. It's a 3-day hearing. It ends today, and the judge is likely to reserve judgment for some time in the future. We might have to wait a number of weeks for this, maybe even months.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm surprising Andy with my slightly sarcastic and bitter tone this afternoon. I am tired. And I'm also tired of an awful lot of this stuff. That said, though, in addition to Liverpool, we've also included a link to a news story from CNN where there are lots of news outlets reporting on this, but CNN was the first one that came to my attention, where Venice is at risk of being put on the UNESCO's endangered list and having its status sort of brought into question. By re-allowing, or by virtue of having re-allowed large ships and cruise ships back into the lagoon, and this is something which I think during COVID the mayor, I think, of Venice, I think that was his title, said no more, thank you. These need to stop coming in. Not only is it bad because it brings lots of people off the boat with COVID, but also at the same time it's bad for the actual historic environment. But that's been rowed back on, if you forgive the pun, in recent months and weeks, and it's interesting that UNESCO is choosing this time to make these sorts of comments about Liverpool, about Venice. I was speculating to you off camera a couple of days ago whether or not this is UNESCO trying to reinforce their authority in places where there's much stronger legal requirements that people listen to their opinion, compared to other parts of the world where their opinion isn't being listened to all that much. It's an interesting thing to. It's an interesting moment to do these two particular things, isn't it?
And it's also interesting to speculate that it may be something to do with the fact that certainly in the last 4 or 5 years, under the Trump government in the States, Orban in Hungary, the Law and Justice Party in Poland, and Boris Johnson's populist government in Britain, the idea of an international rules-based system has been challenged by people like Boris Johnson, who are prepared to breach international law in a very specific and limited way, as they've said over the Northern Ireland protocol.
Would that be akin to being unlawful, or actually breaking the? Anyway,
Look, Mark, before we disappear down that particular rabbit hole, I think we should probably leave that one to my learned friends if and when it happens.
Yeah, no, we should. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, but no, that is a question. It may be that the planets are aligning on this particular issue at this moment, but it's. But yeah, UNESCO, it's a United Nations body. It's an international body, and it perhaps previously it would have expected its remit to be more recognised in first world countries like Britain, and that's no longer the case.
What, that we're first world country, or that?
Probably. If the trade figures carry on going the way they are, yeah. No.
Sorry. Finally.
You are really firing on all cylinders this afternoon.
I'm just angry. I'm just an angry, not so young man anymore. So we have a final thing just to keep an eye on, or a final sort of note, I guess. And also, I should say, if anyone's still listening at this point, over the weekend we'll be recording an interview with Chloe Duckworth of Dig for Archaeology, in which I'll be much more upbeat, because I'll have had a couple of days to chillax in between now and then, and that will be part of next week's watching brief. So look forward to that. But the final thing is, it's just a thing just to hang your coat on, just a thing to be aware of, and that is the news that George Osborne, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, has been appointed as the chairman, in fact, I believe in the headlines it's called, the chairman of the British Museum. This is interesting to me, as George Osborne, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, oversaw swinging cuts. That was the phrase that was used back in the day, 10 years ago or thereabouts. It's quite a cool word. It's a nice word. It implies the sheer volume and motion that it was. This whoosh cuts to national budgets, and also in that sense moving an awful lot of nationally budgeted responsibilities onto the shoulders of local council and authorities, for example. So here in Newcastle, I remember at the time budgets for Newcastle libraries were cut to £0, nothing, for a little while, until there was some serious lobbying. So this person seemingly has a history of cutting notably arts, heritage and cultural budgets, and he's been deemed to be good for the British Museum.
This does look like satire, doesn't it?
Well, at the end of this particular watching brief, it looks as though it's trying to get me just to walk off a pier. It's just like, what? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
Explain.
Look, okay. On the basis that we're all living through living in a computer simulation, and by a really, really bored teenager who's just now taking the piss. But no, George Osborne, Chancellor of the Exchequer under the Cameron Coalition, he instigated cuts of around about 35% in most sort of cultural and heritage bodies. Arts Council, Historic England, English Heritage as it then was. He offloaded the historic buildings portfolio into the New English Heritage, which is a private charity that's meant to be self-supporting by 2024. Post-COVID, good luck with that. So and his career was ended because he backed the wrong horse at Brexit, and when Cameron fell, Osborne fell with him. And since then, he's been picking up directorships, picking up advisory bodies, picking up posts with financial companies and so on, and also editing the London Evening newspaper, never having edited a newspaper before.
Isn't it amazing how these people get to do all these jobs without any experience at all whatsoever, other than just simply the merit of having been themselves or known certain people? It's quite impressive, really, isn't it?
Well, and I'm going to posit to you that explains why the board of the British Museum have appointed Osborne as their new chair. Osborne, by dint of being a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, a figure on the world stage in terms of economics, whatever their achievements, he is what he is. He's done what he's done. when you're a body that is acutely vulnerable to government cuts, and we know that the current Chancellor Rishi Sunak is planning cutbacks in the wake of the amount of money that the government's paid out during the COVID pandemic. I would posit to you that an organisation like the British Museum, which is governed by legislation, many of the board are appointed either directly by the Prime Minister or by the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. It's almost an arm's length government body in itself. It is politically sensible to have as your chair somebody who can pick up the phone and ask to be put through to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister take the call.
Right. Okay, fair enough. I suppose that makes sense. But I mean, I've heard. In fact, I do believe you have described such people as being male, stale, and pale, and essentially, it's a male, stale, pale solution to a very male, stale, and pale problem, and that is needing access to power.
Absolutely, it is absolutely everything that is wrong in the management of this country, in the representation of minorities of all kinds in the management of our institutions,
and for example,
our
the sort of thing
museums,
that
our theatres, government,
to be overtly classist in their recruitment policies, this kind of thing.
All of that. It is wrong that these appointments continue to be made like this, but they're not made like this in a world that we don't inhabit at the moment. We have to make that world first before we can make those appointments. It's realpolitik, unfortunately. I think that's what we're dealing with here. Yesterday, as a joke, when this was announced, I tweeted out a picture of Osborne in the Bullingdon Club photograph when he was at Oxford in the 1980s. It's the famous drinking and dining club in Oxford that Boris Johnson was also a member of, and David Cameron was also a member of. It's famous for smashing up restaurants and burning £50 notes in front of trams, allegedly.
How lovely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a personification of white privilege, and as a joke, I tweeted out the picture with the joke that not particularly good one or particularly original one, but I think it made the point that British Museum publishes picture of shortlisted candidates for the role of chair. All these white, Oxbridge educated, primarily men,
wealthy,
and wealthy and connected and networked. Unfortunately, at the moment, and particularly so under this government, that's how the wheels of government are, how they turn, how they're lubricated. You need to go away and hit something, don't you? Have you? In amongst that, have you got a? I know you play, or either that, or so go to some exotic part of the of I don't know, Morrowind or whatever you're playing, and just beat hell out of some trolls or something.
Yeah, that could be fun, couldn't it? Yeah, just disappear into Skyrim for a bit. No, all of this that we've been talking about today is just a great big pile of, as you say, politique real or realpolitik, and but it's unpleasant. It's self-perpetuating, and it's the sort of thing that is going to be that has to be tackled if the taste that's left in all of our mouths after dealing with this stuff, especially for example in the context of a pandemic, is going to become anything better than bitter, as it were. And
I think as an archaeological sector, and it's what queuing up the conversation that you're going to have with Chloe. It's what contribution the archaeological and heritage sector can make to this discussion. We all want to live in a better place. Lord knows, after COVID, we certainly want to live in a better place. This is almost like it's obviously lucky, neither of us were lucky enough. We're lucky enough not to have had to live through a war to come out of the other end. But COVID has been close to the kind of massive disruption of society that a war brings about. So coming out of it, there is that sort of homes fit for heroes. What can we do to make the world a better place feeling? But it's whether we as individuals, and particularly from a watching brief point of view, from a watching brief audience point of view, whether the archaeology and heritage sector is capable of becoming a strong voice in what comes next.
That's a good question. And on that note, I guess we'll say goodbye for this week. Thank you for your time, Andy, and for putting up with my my shade and side swipes at the people involved in these news stories. Thank you for everyone at home for watching. Hope you found my displeasure entertaining at the very least. And as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.